never got it. That's a stumbling stone. That's a stumbling stone right there. And the reason why they never found it is because they tried so hard to have it by themselves. These people whose righteousness was literally the core pillar of their civilization. Their one goal was to be righteous before God. Every waking moment spent searching and striving and clawing for righteousness. And they didn't get it. I want to read some. We read this a couple weeks ago. It's in Romans chapter 8. Verse 28 says, "And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the likeness of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. And those he predestined, he also called, and those he called, he also justifies. Those he justified, he glorified." That the main part in there is he predestined us, he preknew us. For what reason? Not for us to attain righteousness, so that we would be conformed to the likeness of Jesus. That's the whole point. That's the whole point. It's not just to become righteous people. It's not just to become better people. The whole purpose of Christianity is to make us look like Jesus. To conform us to the likeness and image of Jesus. And in so, inheriting his righteousness. In looking like Jesus, being conformed to his image, gaining a righteousness that is not from ourselves. But as Paul said, it is by faith. And see, and that's the problem that the Jews missed. Is they stopped trying to look like Jesus and started trying to compete with him. They figured instead of being made in the image of Jesus, I will just become as good as Jesus in my works. I'll do all the proper sacrifices. I will do all the proper tithing. I'm not going to pick this up. I'm not going to touch that. I'm going to wear this kind of cloth. I'm going to live here. And so on and so on. Rules upon rules upon rules. But the point is that we don't gain righteousness by our own strivings. You never could. The Israelites worked their entire lives. And you know what? From the outside, they look pretty good. If you were a Jew, you would see these Pharisees and you're like, man, they spend all this time reading the Torah. They do nothing but talk about God. They are so careful with everything they do to follow the rules. This must be a righteous man. They must have righteousness. Paul says, no, they don't. Because they're just trying to earn their own righteousness. But there is no righteousness from men. There's only righteousness that comes from God. And when you believe in him, you have the faith, and you work to be conformed into the likeness of Jesus, and you're not worried about building yourself up, but becoming more like him, you will receive righteousness. In Matthew 7, he says this. Now he's talking about people worrying, spending their life worrying about clothes and food and what they look like and what they eat and all these things. But Jesus says, no, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Seek his kingdom, seek his righteousness, and you're just going to get it all. Don't bother fighting for your kingdom. Don't bother striving for your own righteousness. Look towards him and his. And then you'll be given righteousness. Again, this is Matthew chapter 5. Very, very well known. It says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Now, if you are hungry or if you are thirsty, you ever been hungry? You ever been thirsty? What was your desire? Was it for something from within yourself? Or were you longing for some sort of outside thing to come and fill that desire? Something outside. And Jesus is saying that. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Someone who is poor cannot gift themselves a kingdom that comes from outside. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Someone who is mourning is not going to comfort themselves, but comfort can come from outside. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Those who are soft-spoken, those who don't strive, aren't normally going out and conquering and gaining kingdoms, but it comes from outside. Same with those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. They're not striving from within, trying to create something. They are saying, I need something to come from outside and fill me up and make me strong, because I do not have anything within myself that can fulfill this desire, but I crave for it, for righteousness. We hunger and thirst, but it's only given when we have faith in Christ, and His righteousness will cover us. Now the problem is, like I said, it can be difficult to tell the difference between someone who has Christ's righteousness and someone who has their own, because they can quite often do a lot of the same things. Sometimes we even deceive ourselves as we search for our own righteousness and we figure it kind of looks like what it's supposed to look like. Therefore, I must have attained. So here are some things that we need to be on the lookout in ourselves and in others. First, the difference between a man who has his own righteousness or a man who's trying to get his own righteousness and a man who has God's is humility. You see it especially with the Pharisees. When we're talking about people who had attained righteousness by their own means, it was the Pharisee. They were proud. They were a proud people. Why? Because they truly believed that they had accomplished something. They truly believe that they have accomplished righteousness on their own merit. Whereas a man who has Christ's righteousness knows that it's nothing from him. He never earned anything. And so it keeps them very humble. So watch for humility. Number 2, watch for mercy. Those who have achieved their own righteousness have no mercy. Because they believe if I can do it, you should too. If I'm working this hard and I'm making these sacrifices, you should be too. And so if you have not attained to my righteousness level, it's because you are not trying, or you do not care, or you do not have faith. And so they have no mercy in their eyes. We see that with the Pharisees too. Christ says, you load down people with burdens, but you will not lift a finger to help them. They had no mercy. On the other hand, someone who has attained righteousness by faith will show endless mercy, because they understand that they have received mercy. And so they're not sitting there thinking, oh, you should just do better. They want to come and they want to say, I have been there. I know how you can attain righteousness not by works. And so they show great mercy. And I'm sure some of you are thinking in your brain, and you maybe know people like this. And you're thinking, especially, well, I don't want to get YouTube preachers, TV preachers, high-end Christians attaining their own righteousness. And so we need to look so that we can be wise, but we also need to look at ourselves. If we start getting proud and not showing mercy, we need to maybe stop and say, whoa, where are my expectations coming from? In whose righteousness am I trusting and believing? Because Paul says you can get righteous. It's not that hard. It practically happens by accident. They weren't even looking for it, and they got it. Because they didn't understand righteousness. Gentiles, they didn't know. They hadn't been shown mercy by the Israelites. They'd been cast out as unclean, and so they're like, okay, I guess I'm just unclean. And they come to Jesus, and they're like, oh, this sounds great. there's this Paul guy. He's doing miracles. He's speaking about salvation. This is great. And boom, they believe. And then Paul says, hey, guess what? Now you're righteous. And they're like, really? Righteous? That was easy. Because it wasn't theirs. They didn't strive or work for it. That's what all they saw. A nation of holier than thou's walking around saying, man, they just try all day to be righteous. But Paul says, for those who weren't even looking for him, when you believe in Christ, you start that journey into Christ likeness and you receive his righteousness. So stop striving to get it in your own rights. We can spend so much time and waste so much time trying to build our own righteousness. And honestly, we can do it honestly. I'm not saying everybody who does this is evil. But we can get focused on building our own righteousness. I should do this because that would seems like the holy thing to do, righteousness. But when we stop thinking about, am I being conformed into the likeness of Jesus? Because see, when we're thinking about our righteousness, you're thinking about yourself. How do you look? What am I doing? How do people perceive what I am doing? But when you are working on the most basic tenet of Christianity, which is to be conformed to the image of Christ, you're not thinking about yourself at all. You don't have time. You're trying to learn about Jesus and what he did. You're seeking him. Jesus, what would you do in this situation? You're searching the scriptures. God, how did you reach out? How did you respond? How can I look like you in every second of every day in my life? And in that, we receive righteousness. The only righteousness that is available by faith. By faith in God. Not our own, so that we can boast, but from God. Christ is the end of the law so that there may be righteousness for everyone who believes. Whether you've believed 30 years, you're righteous in Christ. Whether you've believed for 30 seconds, you're righteous in Christ. There is one righteousness for all. And so we are coming today and we are having communion, where we remember, we recall, we reflect upon the call that Jesus gave, and he said, I'm about to do an amazing and marvelous work. Do these things to remember my sacrifice for you. That this is my body that can feed you, that can fill that hunger. This is my blood shed for you. Drink it. Fill that thirst. Hunger and thirst for righteousness, but you ain't going to get it from inside. These things can fulfill your desires for righteousness. Believing in the cross of Christ, letting his blood flow over you, wash you spotless and clean, and take the righteousness that he has given. So I think what we're going to do is I'm going to ask Conrad to come forward, and I'm going to ask Lloyd if you'd come forward. And we're going to pass them out today, all right? We're going to pass them out, all right? Is it?